In February of '58, the year I turned home from Korea, discharged from the Army, my wife and I were married that September in 1958. After 14 years of marriage and 3 daughters, my wife and I were on different pages relating to our spiritual life, a home life, which is parenting, and priorities on how we related to each other. And our personal needs, needless to say, we were on a slippery slope to ending our relationship and the vows that we took on our marriage day in 1958. One day, Ann came home very excited about a conversation she had about a thing called marriage encounter. She explained the gist of the weekend, and I was very upset over it because I didn't think there was anything wrong with our marriage. And she was kind of judging that there was, which of course she was right. Of course, I rejected the idea, and we went on with life as dysfunctional as it was. About a year later, I was having lunch with an architect that was working on the same project I was with the construction company that I was working with. And we spent about 2 hours at lunch, and we never talked about the project. He was so excited about an experience he had over the weekend. Him and his wife went away for a weekend, and he started to share that. It turns out that it wasn't some exotic island. He didn't go to Hawaii or Fiji or any place like that. But he went on a marriage encounter weekend. He was so excited about it that he got me excited, and I couldn't wait to get home so I could share it with Ann. And as it turns out, not to my surprise so much, that when I shared with her my experience at that lunchtime, I asked if she was still interested in going, and of course she said no. I didn't know if she actually wasn't interested anymore, or she was just kind of getting back for the time that I said no to her. So we fast forward again to May of 1974, when we finally got on the same page and agreed to attend a marriage encounter weekend. We checked available dates and found a retreat house out on Long Island. I come from New York, in case you haven't figured that out by now. We found the retreat house there that was having this weekend, and we signed up. Unbeknownst to us, that weekend that we signed up for was Pentecost weekend, which at the time didn't seem very significant, but it turns out that it was quite significant and a stepping stone to the rest of my life and our marriage. Without giving too many details of the weekend, so it won't spoil it for those of you who might want to go, we were given talks by a married couple and a priest. And we were given a question to meditate on and to write our response in a journal that we were keeping for the weekend. The weekend closes with a Mass, and before we all sat down to wait for the Mass to start, we gave our journals to the priest, who placed them on the altar and was going to bless them at the end of Mass so that we could pick them up and take them home and have them for things that we could relate back to and relive our weekend, which was very, very powerful. At the conclusion of the Mass, we were called up a couple at a time, and my wife and Ann were the first couple to be called up to receive our books. The priest for that Mass was Father Ozzy. I'll never forget him. Now this is going back a couple of years, probably some years before some of you were born. Now, he was a priest from the Philippines. He was shorter than I, which is pretty short, and jet black hair, which is not a picture that we see of Jesus depicted around, or some of the actors that played Jesus in the movies. He didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, which I don't think he did anyway. But when he gave me my book, something happened to me. When I looked at Father, I saw Jesus. Not physically, because we know by seeing pictures of Jesus, he didn't look like that. But what I did see was the persona of Jesus, which is pure love. I was so overwhelmed by what I saw and felt that I broke down in tears and just hugged him. I hope I didn't hurt him, because I was hugging a little harder than I would have normally hugged anyone else. But I wasn't hugging the priest, I was hugging Jesus. Now, on the weekend, there were about 10 couples, all now sitting in their pews, like you're sitting there, and I am up here bawling like a baby. And when I finally came back down to earth, if that's what I did, I looked out at these couples. My first thought was embarrassment. How could I do this in front of all these people I just spent the weekend with? I was the macho guy. I wasn't supposed to be crying on the priest's shoulder. But as I looked out into the faces of them, I saw Jesus. My embarrassment turned my attention to what Jesus wants us to do, to see him in all that we meet, which are not accidental or coincidental, but as part of his plan for us. That embarrassing moment that weekend was the beginning of the reality that Jesus is present in all of us. And we need spiritual eyes to recognize him. I was and still am an introvert when it comes to a lot of things, but not when it comes to witnessing what Jesus has done for me. And I'm sure you can think about the things Jesus has done for you and like to share those too. Now, some months after our Marriage Encounter weekend experience, the construction company I was working for asked if I would consider relocating from the New York office to the Chicago office. It was something my wife and I would never have considered. But with our newfound love for each other and the Holy Spirit guiding us, we could at least check it out. I was told that if I did not like what we saw, it would be okay to turn down the move, and I wouldn't get fired or anything, but then they would maybe ask someone else. The company had an apartment on the north side of the city, and we stayed there for the weekend that we were there. We spent the weekend with the president of the company here in Chicago, him and his family, and it was a very nice visit. And the apartment was great. It was on, I don't even remember what floor it was on, but I know it was overlooking Lake Michigan. So that was pretty special. To our surprise, now this was in November of '74. And you know, November in Chicago was not the nicest place to have people come to make a decision to move there. And it was a cold and windy day, and the weekend was cold and windy, in downtown especially. But, and I was surprised, because Anne enjoyed the weekend immensely. She really felt at home, which I thought was odd because we had a lot to consider. Anne was an only child. We were parents to 3 daughters, one of them in high school, which is not a very good time to move people, believe me. We had to sell our house in New York and look for one in Chicago, with winter fast approaching. My parents could not understand why we would even consider something like this. Well, obviously we made the decision, because here I am as proof.